Hey guys, welcome back to Unleashed, and we are so glad to have you with us. And remember, we are the Resistance. This week, we're gonna go in a really interesting direction. I don't know if you remember when I did like the first few weeks of Unleashed when we first started. I did the Big Five man killers in Africa, and this is going to be a special week because we're going to talk about the Big Five at home, and we'll get into that in just a second. But I just kind of wanted to thank Russell Thornberry last week for coming on our podcast and just doing an amazing job telling his stories. And I was so moved by the one story where he was in, I think it was northern Saskatchewan. He was up there on a moose hunt with some buddies, and they had to kind of get out of there, and he got stuck behind watching the gear like 15 miles back into the wilderness in a bad snowstorm. And it was just an amazing story. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go back a week and listen to Russell Thornberry. I think it was called When a Moose Hunt Goes Bad or something like that. But it was a powerful story. But I love the wilderness. I just think there's something special about, the Great North. When I was a kid, I would read was Outdoor Life and Fur Fish and Game and Boy's Life and some of those magazines. And I was always just drawn, towards some of those areas where you've got, giant moose, 7 feet tall at the shoulder, 1,600 pounds. You've got, giant brown bears, 10 foot 6 inch, 1,200 pounders, just Boone and Crockett stuff. Just amazes me that God could create something like that. And I got a call, it was this morning actually, and it was from Alaska. I had spoken in Fairbanks this past October for a men's event up there, and they asked if my wife Stacy and I could come back and do a combination both men's and women's weekend where Stacy could speak to the women and I would speak to the men, and we kind of got that all ironed out. I'm so thankful to be going back. That'll be in 2025. I think we're looking at early May was when they were talking about. And you know what? If you guys are doing events, I love speaking for events. It's what I do besides doing this podcast. So if you're looking to do like a game dinner or a men's conference, men's retreat, I love doing men's retreats, or even Sunday mornings, or something where we can do, something with both the men and the women, give us a call. You can go to unleashed.men and you can get the booking information off there. Also, if you listen to the podcast and you want more, you can subscribe to Unleashed Plus, and you can find that on the same website as well. Anyhow, I love, red meat. I love caribou, I love moose, I love venison. There's just something about when you go out and you harvest it yourself, there's just that adventure element that goes along with it. I was really excited when they asked me to come back up there to Alaska this next year. It won't be during a hunting season, but I still get to see Denali in the background. Just an amazing place. And I was cooking out venison burgers last night for dinner. And there's something about doing it yourself. And so, sometimes, when Stacy, she's had a long day at work, she works at a hospital and different things, and she's like, man, can we just go out for dinner tonight? So we went to Texas Roadhouse, not far from our house here. And as we were sitting in the rolls at Texas Roadhouse, oh my gosh, I got to stay away from them. They are amazing. But I'm the kind of guy that always goes and, I get that, just like a sirloin with medium rare, more toward the rare side. But when we were sitting there, we started getting into a conversation about the podcast, upcoming episodes, what are we going to talk about here? And I was processing with her. And there's just sometimes when your wife can speak into you in areas that you're missing, like nobody else can. And for a lot of us, we want to blame and defend if we feel like they're, kind of pointing something out that we should be doing different. And I kind of started to go there at first because she was talking about, Brent, you're so focused on the podcast that it's kind of like you've forgotten about, your bookings and upcoming events and getting those things, on the books. And that is so true because I love speaking into the hearts of men. I've never been one to really think much about, money and income. And I know that sounds really weird, but I've always trusted God to take care of, whatever is going on here. And he has. But I also have to be responsible with the things that he's given me, the giftings and the calling to go and reach men with the gospel. And now Stacy and I being able to both go out and talk about stuff. But there are times, honestly, guys, that I would rather almost be facing like the Big Five of Africa with my weapon or whatever it is, than I would sometimes those conversations with my wife. You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like we kind of try to give the answer that we think they're looking for to kind of get out of jail free card kind of a thing so we can kind of move on. But she wasn't going there. She was like, no, this is something we need to talk about. And I had to swallow hard and go, you know what? It is so true that sometimes wives can speak into you where no one else can. So today we're going to talk about the Big Five at home. A little different than the Big Five of Africa, but you can remember when I told you about the Big Five in Africa that was a place where I had to face my emotions. Well, facing the terrifying things that crawl and slither across the floors of Africa is tough, no doubt. But facing my wife when I don't know the right thing to say, to be honest, it can be scarier than any black mamba. You remember that story, or even a full-grown male lion sometimes, because again, I'm with other guys. I've got the right weapon for the job. But when I'm alone and it's just my wife and I, and she can be speaking into me in some areas that need to be tuned up, so to speak, I sometimes don't know what to say. And I think it's because if she's questioning what I'm getting done or how I'm doing something, it feels almost like she's questioning that thing we've talked about. Do I have what it takes? Some days it can feel like, maybe for a lot of us that our wives are just waiting for that opportunity to pounce, if they smell any weakness or insecurity in us. And when we're not thinking straight, our fear of not being good enough or not having the perfect words to say, man, it can create like a crippling emotion, things like fear and anger, which, can lead us to things like, fight or flight. Neither of those are good options. And we'll find ourselves either defending or blaming, or we're trying to please them just to diffuse the situation. So kind of simply put, men and women, we don't think alike, ever. We see life differently. We respond to life situations differently. And I said it in an earlier podcast. I'll repeat it now. It's just that you have to learn to take your spiritual temperature and get your thoughts, emotions, and actions in line when those attacks come. And full well, believe me, they will come. So understanding and managing the thoughts and emotions in your relationships, it's going to save you more strife than you can possibly imagine. So we're going to go down that path a little bit today. And this is going to be interesting because it might bring out a little bit of anger in you, but I think it's going to be really revealing. And I think it's great for both men and women to listen to this week's podcast and next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about, why are men visually stimulated? But we're going to keep it this week with the Big Five at home. So if you're like a lot of guys, like me, my cell phone is on my nightstand before I go to bed. I set my alarm and I get up in the morning. And the first thing I do is I either check the weather or the news or sports or email, stuff we've got going on with the debates and the presidential running and all this stuff going on right now. And in my, when I check my social media, I kind of see, what people have been posting before I get up. And in my book, Into the Wilds, I talked about checking my cell phone one morning while I was still in bed. And I had read this post on Facebook that was put up by a woman. I'm not going to mention her name. But there was an image of a large muscled man, dressed in a tank top. He had on sweatpants and he was doing chores around the house. And here's what was in her post. It starts off with capital letters, facts, F-A-C-T-S. The number one thing that turns a woman on is when a man helps a woman around the house. Let her come home and see that the dishes are washed, he's cooked dinner, dusted the rooms, took out the trash, vacuumed the house, did the laundry, and she won't have anything to do but her man. As I scrolled up, to her next post, it was from a site called Hot Moms Club. And there was a picture of this tattooed woman holding a little boy in her arms, and the caption said, "A woman has one boy she will never lose feelings for, and that's her son." And my immediate, emotional response was anger, to be honest. And if I could have removed my fingers from my throat, I could have posted a responsive rant that would have read probably something like this. Yeah, and you'll say you'll never lose feelings for your man either, as long as he washes dishes, cooks dinner, does the house, takes out the trash, vacuums the house, does laundry, rubs your feet after a hard day, listens for hours as you talk about the kids and your girlfriends, shows affection, engages in deep, meaningful conversation until there are no more words left on the planet, plans the next 5 date nights, sits for hours at the mall while you try on clothes, never says anything that would make you feel fat, skinny, or average, never looking at another woman's direction, and don't spend any time at the gym getting those big muscles in the picture that the woman just drooled over because he was so hot. But instead, I let all that kind of hypocrisy penetrate my cerebral cortex for a few minutes. And I slowed my breathing and I choked back my gag reflex. And I read this woman's post immediately above the number one facts post. And the site was called Girlfriends in God. There was a verse and it said, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." This whole thing I was thinking about feeling like I wasn't good enough, and I was feeling kind of overtaken with emotions. It kind of feeling like there's these big checklists that men have to check off to make sure that their wives are happy and taken care of. But guys, you and I both know there's really like two things that men really want. We want some good food to eat, and we love to be intimate with our wife. And so, it's those moments when we all need a really good reality check. And unlike in that movie, Jerry Maguire, statements like, "You complete me," and "You had me at hello," they're simply not true for both men and women. We have romanticized those lines. We've worked them into books and movies, locker room talk, girlfriend's table talk, but they all stem from a lie. Sorry to burst your bubble. But what is the root cause? It's coveting. Anytime that you give another person the power to make you feel great about yourself, i.e. like "you complete me," you've also given them the power to use a glance or a side comment to make you feel horrible about yourself. Remember that your good enough comes from Christ in you. It doesn't come from external sources. About on a weekly basis, I always get some guy call me or text me or email me or message me, whatever, saying that he is extremely angry with his wife. That he's thinking about separating her. He's thinking about getting a divorce. And when I ask him why, he almost always responds with, I just can't take her constant disrespect for me anymore. No matter what I do, it is never enough. Just like the woman getting her self-worth from how she looks, this man is attempting to fill the same void with his wife's respect. She was wanting all those things, but a man is wanting his wife to respect him. And after listening to, a man's anger and empathizing with his feelings, I usually ask this question. If you didn't need your wife's respect, would you need to punch the wall, throw stuff in the garage, get separated, or file for a divorce? And most of the time, the response is the same. No, but how do I get to a place where I don't need her respect? Doesn't the Bible say that wives are to respect their husbands? Yeah, it does. But men are also called to love their wives. And I know this is an extremely sensitive topic and one that has probably caused more heartache and anger than any other. But within the church, and neither side feels heard, a woman needs to be listened to. And if a woman's need to be listened to would be deemed as important as a man's need for sex, there probably would be a lot of naked conversations going on. Sorry, just keeping it honest. And about a decade ago, this is really interesting. I was sitting in a staff meeting at church, and they were talking about this book called His Needs and Her Needs. And, fairly good book. But when it came up, it kind of got ugly. It wasn't real pretty. And here's kind of how the conversation went when we brought up these women's needs and men's needs. Using the lists in the book, one of the pastors, who was a friend of mine, he wrote out the top 5 needs of a woman on the board. And as he wrote them down, I watched the room. And the women who were there, I think there was 4 women in the room at the time. I think there was 5 men. The women crossed their arms and they smiled, while the men just kind of shook their heads aside and waited for the boot to drop. And here's why. Here was the woman's big 5 needs as they were written down in order. Number 1 was affection. Number 2 was conversation. Number 3 was honesty. Number 4 was financial support. Number 5 was family commitment. And in case you didn't notice, domestic support was not one of the big 5 needs, and that was one of the ones that woman's post on Facebook claimed to be like number 1, but actually affection was number 1. So after writing the big 5 on the board, he asked all the men in the room if they would rate, each of the woman's needs this like a nobility scale, by using a 1 to 10, 10 being the most important. So here were the men's responses to the big 5 needs of a woman using the 10 scale. Number 1 was affection. All the men, myself included, gave it a 10. That's the top of the list. Number 2 was conversation. We gave it a 10. Number 3 was honesty. We gave it a 10. Financial support. We gave it, a 10. And number 5 was family commitment, and we gave it a 10. And there were no smart aleck responses from the men. It was more of a sense of shame that maybe we felt like we could do better in every area. But the woman's responses affirmed, how important each of the 5 were to them and how it makes them feel secure and loved when the man provides each of those, big 5 needs. So this gets interesting now. So after doing all that stuff and the women were feeling affirmed and we were kind of feeling like scum, feeling like we need to do better because they are that important to women, he wrote down the big 5 needs of a man. So kind of fasten your seatbelts. Number 1, drum roll, we know what's coming, sexual fulfillment. Number 2 was recreational companionship. Number 3 was an attractive spouse. 4, domestic support. And 5 was admiration. Now these are a big 5 man's needs. But before he could write down the second of the top 5 needs that I just listed, every one of the women in the room began to mock and complain about need number 1, which was sexual fulfillment. That's all men want is sex. That's all they think about. Now, this is the responses in the room. Men just need to find a bathroom and get their frustrations out and quit expecting the women to do his dirty work for them. This is in a church, our staff meeting. And the look on the men's faces was unanimous. Like, whoa, where did that come from? And again, this was coming from the woman who worked at the church. So then he wrote down number 2, recreational companionship. What were the women's responses? And I'm being honest about all these. All men want is for women to go and do whatever he wants to do. Okay, number 3, an attractive spouse. Their response? We can't compete with younger things you're looking at on porn sites and in TV commercials. And if that's what you want, you can just go find some 18-year-old to fill your fantasies. We're out of here. We're crawling under the table at this point, right? And the response with the next one was domestic support. And what they said was, all men want is a woman to pick up after them. You can clean the dang house yourself, kind of a finger snap included. And finally, number 5 was admiration. And their response was, you just want women to worship the ground you walk on while we get nothing in return. Now it was time for the women to score the big 5 men's needs. So how did the women score the importance of men's needs using that 10-point scale? Sexual fulfillment, which was our number 1 need, they scored it -2. Recreational companionship, -2. An attractive spouse, -1. Domestic support, -2. And admiration, -10. At this point, every one of the guys were like beside ourselves, right? And, I can remember one of the guys saying, now, ladies, you can see why men feel so disrespected. My buddy continued to, use this illustration. And it opened up a little more conversation. And he said, imagine the wife saying this to the man. If only our husbands would talk to us more, it would make life so much easier. And then the husband answers, I have no interest in being feminized, so I'm not going to talk, any more the rest of the way home. But how would the woman have reacted if her husband would have said, I'll listen to you, but you need to take your clothes off first? She would have been totally outraged. But again, remember, her number 1 need and his number 1 need. The room fell, silent. And, something that women don't understand is how men are wired differently than they are. God created man to be visually stimulated, which we're going to talk about in next week's podcast. You don't want to miss that one. And he made us to be visually stimulated. And in marriage, physical intimacy is at the top for most men. Believe it or not, these needs aren't made up. There is plenty of biblical support for both men's needs and women's needs. Let's kind of look at a couple of verses. This is James 1:9. Chapter 1, verse 19. This is out of the NASB. And it says, This my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Um, Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal faithfully are his delight. We're talking about honesty, some of the women's needs here. And the men's, let's look at one of those verses. Let's go to, let me see here, 1 Corinthians 7:5. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. And that was out of the Message paraphrase, by the way, in case you were looking for that. Or as another translation begins with the same verse, it says, stop depriving one another. As a loving hind and a grateful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. That's Proverbs 5:19 out of the NASB. Now that's pretty explicit stuff. And it really is powerful because God made the beauty of a relationship, our bodies and our emotions, to share with one another in a marriage and to not withhold. So then, what was the tiebreaker, between us all? I mean, it wasn't, getting resolved real quick. But here's what else the Bible says about getting our needs met by anyone other than Christ. This is Luke 14:26. It says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Colossians 3:5 says, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is wanting what we don't have when we covet, which is idolatry. And then I love 1 Peter 4:1 and 2. This is out of the Message again. I just love this verse. Because we're talking about us having these unhealthy emotions because we're wanting something we think that we should be getting, like respect or sex, or for the woman, we want the the conversations, the honesty. But listen to what it says in 1 Peter 4:1 and 2. Since Jesus went through everything you're going through and more, learn to think like him. Not what they say on social media or on television talk shows. It says, think of your sufferings as a weaning away from the old sinful habit of always expecting to get your own way. Then you'll be able to live out your days free to pursue what God wants instead of being tyrannized by what you want. Again, that was out of the Message paraphrase. That was 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. I want to talk for a minute about a principle, and it's called love more and need less. And one of the greatest principles for having a healthy marriage, or a relationship is based on the following scripture out of Ephesians 5 from the Message. It says, watch what God does, and then you do the same, like children who learn proper behavior from good parents. God's chief job is to love you. Keep company with him and learn a life of love. Observe how Christ loved us. His love was not cautious but extravagant. He didn't love in order to get something from us, but to give everything of himself to us. And then it ends with, love others like that. God's command to us are to love him and to love others as we love ourselves. But the problem begins when we think that we have to have another person's love and respect in order to be content with ourselves. And so as long as our worth and value are dependent upon what others think about us, we are always going to try to manipulate them to get our own needs met. When women call men pigs, because of their desire for sex or an attractive spouse, what they're simply trying to do is they're trying to find they're good enough. But to men, it comes out sounding like manipulation by putting men down. And if a woman's worth and value comes from where her true beauty resonates, Christ in her, she wouldn't need to put men down or post on social media about all the things that men should be doing or doing them better in order to gain, her love and respect. And if a man is secure in his true identity, Christ in him, he wouldn't instantly feel disrespected when he fails to get what he desires from his wife. Like when I was talking about being in Roadhouse and she was needing to talk about me about, getting back on getting bookings going to make sure again that I can help provide for the family. But neither of the husband or wife derive their worth and value from what others think of them. That's the way it has to be. It has to come from God's Spirit, in us, or else we're going to be tyrannized. We're going to remain on that hamster wheel of performance, working hard to get what we want and feel like we deserve, for the rest of our lives. We have to get that question answered. Where does our good enough comes from? Unfortunately, we don't hear this truth preached a whole lot in churches. Most of the sermons that I've sat through on this topic, they've been filled with statements like, if you'll just do all these things for your spouse, they're going to want to do them for you in return. It's your Christian duty. Sorry, but that's kind of a crock, because you don't love out of obligation, which is only going to leave you angry and resentful. You love out of your true being, like it says in Luke 6, which is Christ in you, which needs nothing in return. That's the love more and need nothing. But here's the hard truth. There is no guarantee that your spouse is going to change. Plus, if you're doing all these things to get your spouse to give you what you want, is that love or is that manipulation? Anytime that we start a sentence with this, and I've had, women call me on the phone who they want to get their husband in counseling, and they'll start off with, how do I get my spouse to? And I had men do the same thing with women. How do I get them to? We've started down a dangerous path, and it's manipulation. And it's only going to leave you feeling frustrated, angry. You're going to feel insecure, and it's going to cause you to try to get rather than to give in your relationships. And we really do need to learn how to love more and need less. It's amazing, how quickly relationships can change and heal once the principle of love more and need less is applied. Did Jesus take from others to find his good enough? Did he use manipulation or control to try to get his needs met? No. How did he do it then? His true being was brimming over into true words and deeds because he was living out of the core of who he really was. Once again, look at Luke 6:43 and 45. This is the passage I wanted to bring up. It says, "You don't get wormy apples off a healthy tree, nor good apples off a diseased tree. The health of the apple tells the health of the tree." You must begin with your own life-giving lives. It's who you are, not what you say and do that counts. And then it finishes up with this: your true being brims over into true words and deeds. See, when we have healthy roots, we're going to have healthy fruits. We have the same power, through Christ in us when we live out of God's Spirit, who came into us the moment that we truly believed. And the false me always requires control and manipulation to get my needs met. When I'm living in the false me, I destroy trust, I push others away, and I end up drawing attention to myself. And the true me requires nothing in return, because I'm already 100% complete in Christ. And when I'm living out of my true being, I build trust, I create deeper relationships, and that is what draws people, what draws our wives, to us, and it's through Jesus. That's the power of getting our one true identity from the one who created us. So, sorry, Jerry Maguire lovers, your wife doesn't complete you. And if she does, chances are you've made her into an idol. And you can never really love her how she needs to be loved, which is unconditionally. So let me end with this. If my worth and value has anything to do with what you think about me, I will try and manipulate you to get my needs met. So what is the answer? We have to learn how to think and love like Jesus. Love more and need less. We'll see you next time.